Hey there, everybody! It's your cartoonist pal Stan here, back for another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, show to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons by me doing drawings of cartoon homages to classic art from each year that Dungeons and Dragons has been around. And while I'm doing that, talk to some of my friends, some people I know who have been involved in the game a long time and have some insights into the history of the game, and are big fans of it too. Uh, in case you don't know, there is a free newsletter for this show. It's at 50yearsinthe.dungeon.substack.com. You can go there and sign up. There is a paid version, which, of course, like some people to sign up for, but really, let's just start with the free. Right? You get notes about what's coming up on the show. You'll get a copy of the drawings that I do sent to your email and other inside information. So when you get a chance, check that out. I see we got Rune Scryer. Thank you for joining us. Linnea and Jeff Grubb is here. Dale Donovan. Already got a big crowd. See, people love my guest tonight. So let's just get on with it because people want to talk to Ted. No, sorry, Ed. I'm going to do that all night because I have known him for a very long time. Ted is what I call him, but you know him as Ed Stark. He is a long time D&D aficionado. He's been playing longer than I have, I'm pretty sure, and he was on staff at TSR before I got there. We worked together at TSR and Wizards, and we've been to a lot of game conventions and other projects together, and it makes me really happy to have him here so we can have a nice little chat about Dungeons and Dragons. So let me bring on in Ed Stark. There we go, Ed. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Stan. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I don't mind if you call me Ted. Probably half the people who sign on will call me Ted, and the other half will Ed, and then one or two will go to Ed. So,
well, that's how I write it, but I try just to say Ted. But every time I'm talking to someone who knows you as Ed, and I say Ted, they go, "What? Who? Do people still call him that?" Well, I do. So
a diminishing.
it's kind of like me. There's still people that call me Steve, and they think it's cute that people call me Stan. What can you do? You know, as long as they don't write us the wrong checks, we're happy, right?
Yeah, well, I still, I have a couple of credits in various different names. I still, if you'll notice, I always, when I write to you, I put Stan exclamation point the way it's supposed to be. So.
And and
Which is funny because I am also pedantic about my grammar. So it's Stan exclamation mark, comma, how are you doing? So you get lots of punctuation.
and I love it because I do that too, and a lot of people just don't know what to do. First of all, the spell check goes absolutely berserk.
Yep.
Let's see. Dina Kraus is there. Ed, Ted, same dude, she says.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Grubb says, hi. Hiya, Jeff. So, Ted, you and I go back a long ways. I was figuring this out that we probably met sometime in 83 or 84, although we didn't know each other very well then. But
Yeah.
at
We didn't really, I don't think we really got to know each other until you came back from Japan the first time.
well, we'd interacted some before that. We'd played in games together.
Yeah.
We didn't get particularly close till then. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I've known who you were. I knew you on sight. I knew to call you Ed or Ted.
Yeah.
Uh,
Ted, probably.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
from probably 19 let's say 83 or 84 at Fat Cat Books.
Probably. Yeah. We definitely crossed paths there because I started going to Fat Cats just after I started playing D&D because I grew up in a very small town, northeastern PA, as you well know. You visited. Uh, and we had one tiny little bookstore. My basement is that I'm sitting in right now is probably larger than the bookstore was. Uh, so the only place to get regular supply of comics, game stuff, and everything was to go up to Binghamton and Johnson City and go get stuff at Fat Cats. And so that became a regular hangout. And I thought it was really funny because every summer I would ask them if they needed any extra help. And of course, they never did. And then when I was finally in graduate school many years later, I kept coming in because I had grad school just down the road. And Tana, the manager there, goes, "Hey, you're in all the time." I'm like, "Well, I have breaks in my class." She's like, "How are you on Mondays and Fridays?" It's like, "I'm actually free on Mondays and Fridays." Like, "Would you like a job?" It's like, "Okay." So it was funny, you know. I'd always wanted to work there, and I got to grad school. Of course,
Just
that was just a
it's mad. It's like
huge,
magic. All right. So before we
yeah.
get going, why don't you just do a quick introduction for the? I mean, everyone in the chat right now knows, but hopefully some people will be watching this on replay who may be new to you. Just give us a brief wrap up of the professional life of Ed Stark.
Well, it all started when Ming the Merciless focused his attention on a small planet called Earth. No, no, yeah,
So wait, before
as
you do that, have you seen the new Flash Gordon comic strip that's being syndicated now?
I have not, and I would
You
like
should.
to. I'm
So you
a
should
big fan.
you
So
should look that up. I will. I'll send you a link after the show. It's awesome. But please
that would
continue.
be, yeah. Uh, so yeah, I started starting off with D&D. This show is about 1976, I guess, D&D. But
In
I
theory,
was
yeah, that's I'm going to be picking art from '76, but really,
I,
interviews about you.
well, giving you a little context. I didn't really know about D&D until at that time. Probably would have loved it because the first adult book I ever read was Moby Dick. You know, Big Tale of Adventure, and I read that when I was about 8 or so. And then the next really big books that I can remember, I know there were some others, were The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And I just was hooked into fantasy. I read every fantasy book I could find. I read a lot of mythology books because those were the things you could get in the library. For the most part, at that time, libraries didn't really have fantasy sections. I read a lot of H.G. Wells, all this other stuff. I found out that H.G. Wells actually was a gamer. He created like board games and stuff. And I was into games, but mostly the sort of stuff that you could buy at your local toy store and everything. Monopoly, Scrabble, Risk, things like that. But my sister, I remember, made a game that I still have. She was an artist, or she is an artist, and made a beautiful cloth map of Middle Earth. And it was basically a very simple adventure game where you played as the Fellowship or as Sauron,
Hmm.
and you were trying to get the ring to Mount Doom or stop the ring from getting there. There are all these little event cards and things like that. Um, that really, it wasn't just that game, but that sort of thing really got me interested in adventure games, even though I didn't really know what that was then.
Right.
And I, I'm pretty sure, and I can't say this for certain, but I'm pretty sure I discovered D&D through the old, remember the Dave Sutherland comic strip ads that they
Yeah.
put in the comic books. I'm pretty sure that was probably the first thing I saw because I started buying comics about that time too. Those were, I think, 1981,
Yep.
which
Oh
fits
wow. So
about the right time.
weird. I thought for sure. So it turns out I've actually been playing a year or two longer than you.
Probably,
But
yeah. I mean, I'm not exactly sure on this, but I got the original box set, the one that where they had the short run that had the dice, and then I got the set that had the counters. And I actually wrote an article in Dragon about this, so you all should dig up your Dragon archives and read this. It was under our first Quest series of articles, and basically, I took the game to school, and as Steve talked about last week, this was pre-Satanic Panic and everything, so nobody thought anything of you bringing in D&D books or anything like that. And I was sitting there reading it in study hall, and a guy I knew named Mike who I was friends with, but not super close. We knew each other and everything. He goes, "Oh, do you play D&D?" And I was sitting there trying to figure out the rules. And you know what it's like,
Yeah.
especially if you've never even heard of something like that, to get this drop down and you're trying to figure it out. I mean, I'd assumed it was some sort of board game or something. And so I'm sitting here reading it, and I'm getting an idea, and I'm creating characters on my own and all that. And uh, and Mike goes, "Oh, you play D&D?" And I said, "Well, I haven't played yet." And he goes, "Well, I play. I play with my big brother and some of his friends, and I can show you." And I said, "Okay, great. Why don't you come over on Saturday?" So he came over, and I had gotten all these little Dixie cups and put all the
Right.
different dice counters in the Dixie cups, and I had them all spread out. And I had the book there, and he comes in, and he's got a book. He's got the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is the only book he owned.
Hmm.
And in fact, at that time, I'm not even sure all the hardcovers were out quite yet.
If the DMG
Um,
was out, that was the last of the hardcovers.
that was the last one, yes. So it had to be, but he didn't have the other two. Uh, and he looks at the little counters. He goes, "What are those?" And I said, "Oh, these are the things that my box didn't come with dice. This is what they gave me." And he goes, "That's okay. I've got dice." And he brings out this little bag that has dice in it. That was kind of that was the ending of the article. Is I've got dice, and uh, so that was cool. And that was also led to my trips up to Fat Cats to buy dice and to get
Right.
miniatures like that.
Right.
I've just been starting repainting miniatures, and I actually dug out some of my old original miniatures. I'm going like this as if you can see them, but they're sitting up there and still got them back, the old lead miniatures. And uh, it was fun. For a while, we played together.
All right. Hey,
All we
hold on.
had was
Let me segue before we get going. Torin, yes, we are live. You made it. Congratulations. Glad to see you. I just want to segue over here. Wow, why would it do that?
a big yellow box. Well, I can see why that's more
Big
interesting
yellow
than my
box
photo.
is very exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why is that not working? Well, this is the kind of thing that we just don't know why these things do or don't work.
This is what we do live.
That's right.
You don't
This
have
is this is
to know, right?
all right. So if we edit this, video source is
Video source killed the
uh,
radio.
oh, I see what happened. I see
Oh,
exactly
we
what
lost
happened.
some now. Dropped from 9 to 8.
Well,
Oh,
I'll
but
tell
now
you,
it's back.
and for those who might be interested, but right before the show, we had a little bit of technical difficulty, and because of that, the feed to my iPad dropped out too. But now it should be back. There we go. All right. Woo.
How fast is Godspeed?
So I'm going to be doing drawing. You're saying the nominally this being the third episode of the sketch where I'm doing sketching. I'm in the third year of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm going to be doing the cover for the Swords and Spells, which was the last of the little digest-sized products that neither you nor I bought first time through because we came to the game later than that. But I just wanted to start with that, get going. Let's get back to so you and Mike introduced you to actual dice and Fat Cat
Yeah,
book.
yeah. And well, he didn't introduce me to Fat Cats, I don't think. We found out about that in other ways, but we he did introduce me to dice and to help me learn how to play D&D. And we basically did a thing where we would sort of DM for each other, where we each play a character or maybe multiple characters and just run little adventures for each other. And the funny thing was, since we only had the basic set and the DMG, uh, don't know if you remember, in the back of the DMG, there are all the experience tables and has all the stats for all the monsters, but it doesn't
Yeah.
have any descriptions or any pictures, whatever. So it was funny because quite often we design dungeons, and you hear the classic, oh, you put the ancient red dragon in the 10 by 10 room.
Mhm.
Well, we didn't do anything quite like that, but we didn't know what a Neo Atiug was. We just knew it had so many hit dice and what attacks it did and all that sort of thing. my mom used to have this really great quote where every once in a while she'd show up upstairs with like a tray of cookies or something like that. She'd poke her head in. She said that almost every time she looked in on us, we were just sitting there reading books, because we're looking up rules or whatever. And she described D&D as 20 minutes of excitement crammed into 4 hours of playtime. I always thought that was a great
So
quote.
many people have been given uh, have said that, and the
Yep.
person that's usually quoted is Janice Radcliffe.
Yep.
Um,
My mom definitely said it back in the 80s.
I,
So
I
it
believe you.
doesn't mean that Dennis didn't say it either. But
All
yeah,
right.
it was
For
fun.
some reason, hmm. Uh,
We lost all the people.
yeah, no, the streaming stopped, but the recording seems to have continued. Let me. So go on. There. Focus, Stan. Focus. Um, so you you got that job at Fat Cat, and that was during your
Grad.
graduate school.
So yeah, there's a little bit funny sequence in there.
Mm,
So uh, while I was in grad school, I was down at my then girlfriend, then wife's house,
mm,
visiting her, and her father was looking in the newspaper, and he said, "Hey, there's a job opening at a game company." I said, "Really? They're advertising in the newspaper? It's interesting." It's, of course, before the internet or whatever. And yeah, there's a job for an editorial position at West End Games.
hold on. All right, so we're having a little bit of tech problems, but we seem to be back. Um,
Linnea pointed
that's
out that the subscription reminder looped her back.
yeah. Well, that's
That's
nice. Uh, I'm getting
we'll
texts.
see.
I'm getting texts from people. Uh, Jeff Grubb says, "Let him know we're back on YouTube." All right. Well, let's go back and let's get this done. Let's get back to the conversation before we lose it again.
Okay. Where do you want me to start?
Oh well, I think you were telling me something about what was interesting about your time uh,
Oh, yeah.
with Fat Cat,
So
and
Jill's dad pointed out uh, the opening at West End Games for an editor.
right.
So I applied. And I got an interview. I got an interview with Bill Slavisek, who at that time was the lead editor there and designer. I guess you know how West End was, very small. But anyway, I was still in grad school, and they needed somebody right away. So they thanked me for coming out and that they'd keep my resume, but you know they were going to pass at that time, which was fine. I finished grad school, got a couple of master's degrees, and went on to do some teaching. But it was mostly substitute teaching because it turned out I'd priced myself out of the secondary school market by getting a couple of master's degrees. Didn't really think about that. Anyway, that was when I started. I had been working at Fat Cat Books for a little while. And so after leaving grad school, I kept working at Fat Cats. I kept substitute teaching. And I kept doing other stuff. I even sent away a couple of inquiries about doing freelance writing, but I
Mm-hmm.
never really pursued it that seriously. It's kind of funny. I'd always written modules and stuff for myself, but I'd never really thought about getting published. It just always seemed like something other people did, just
Right.
sort of, it didn't really occur to me that I could do that until Jill's dad saw this ad. And that, that winter, I was working at Fat Cats. I had gone from working 2 days a week to working like four or five, just filling in and stuff. And it was funny because I was working about three jobs at the time, four if you count substitute teaching. And there's this call, and Tana looks over at me and she goes, "Do you know a Rich Haran?" I said, "No." She says, "He's calling from West End Games." Okay, so I go over and I take the phone, and he said, this guy, Rich Haran, says, "Hey, you want to come in for an interview?" Basically, there was a longer conversation than that, and I did. I went in and got the interview and ended up getting the job. And one of the things I thought was funny is I was now interviewing with this other person, not Bill. And my weird assumption was that Bill had gotten promoted or something, that this rich person had taken over for him. And as you and I both know, they had actually parted ways with Bill, and this is his story to tell, when they moved out to Pennsylvania and everything, and it replaced him with two people, me and another guy.
Yeah.
And, so I started work at my first professional game job uh, the following January 2nd, and worked there for 5 years. Uh, Working on Star Wars and Torg, Paranoia. I was the Paranoia line editor. And then I became kind of their lead designer, designing games like Shatterzone and Masterbook, and working on other things. Uh, but after about 5 years, it was time to move on. And that's how I ended up at TSR, lead designer in the Birthright group and Worlds group. And uh, then after TSR was acquired by Wizards, went out to Seattle, uh, became an assistant brand manager back when brand and creative weren't separated. And then when they separated the two, I became a creative director for D&D, and uh, was creative director during the development and publication of third edition and 3.5. And then I moved over into special projects, which was mostly handling like computer game licenses and things like that, while fourth edition was under development. It was interesting because I was tapped to be one of the leads on the new Forgotten Realms book for fourth edition when I left to go to the computer game industry, where I worked at Red 5 Studios, lead writer on a game called Firefall, and then Vigil Games THQ, worked as a lead writer on Warhammer 40K, and then finally moved to where I am now, ZeniMax Online Studios, working on Elder Scrolls Online. I'm a zone lead there. You can actually see behind me some of the cover art from a couple of products. This one is from Greymoor or Western Skyrim, and the other one is from High Isle. I was lead on both of those, as well as Merkmeyer, which the artwork is upstairs. It's a much larger piece. I'm currently working on this year's chapter, which is called Gold Road. It's going to explore Westweald, a part of Clovian Imperial area in Elder Scrolls, for any of those who are Elder Scrolls fans. And if you're not, it's still doing that. It's just
it just means
those
less
names.
to you.
Yeah.
Sweet. So let's focus on D&D. So I mean, you and I both worked at West End, right? We for a while. West.
Yep.
I don't know if TSR ever considered it, but West End considered itself the AAA team for TSR because a whole bunch of the staff wound up following Bill and you out and joining
Yeah.
the staff
I
there.
seem to I seem to have a tendency to pull people along, intentionally or not. But yeah, Bill Slavisek now had been working at TSR probably for I think about a year and a half before I started there. He had done freelance for West End even after he left the game, so that's how I got to know him. But I applied on my own. I had the funniest job interview. It was hysterical. So you want to hear about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, of course, back then, it's kind of similar now. I took a day off from West End. Didn't tell anybody what I was doing, except possibly you and Bill, maybe. But flew out to TSR for a interview. Now, flying from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin, not that big a deal. 1 day trip. But basically, got up at like 5 in the morning, put on a suit because you wear a suit to a job interview. Did back then anyway.
Back then, you
And
did.
Yeah, got to Wisconsin, which meant flying into Milwaukee. And by the way, this was in like January, February timeline. Uh, drive, get somebody had picks me up at the airport, drive me there. I get to TSR probably about 8:30 in the morning. I come in and I'm introduced to Tim Brown, who at that time was I don't remember exactly what his title was, like the director of RPG development. He was right below Jim Ward, who was VP. He was over all the creative directors. And I go into his office, got a nice corner office, big desk, and there's a big stack of books and boxes and stuff on it. But I'm paying attention to Tim, and Tim starts talking about TSR and welcome, good morning, all that sort of stuff, and then just starts talking about the position he's interviewing me for. Then he starts talking about what he'd like me to do. Then he starts talking about and kind of like it if you could start like mid end of March. And I was like, wait a minute, did we skip a big chunk of the day? But the stack of books on his desk, which I swear was a couple of feet high, were all the things that I had written or worked on at West End. And I realized, with West End's, as you know, quite aggressive schedule, that meant there were a lot of things. I'd done dozens of game products, a couple of games, a couple of novels. I was like, oh, okay, so he's done his homework anyway. But we did have more of a conventional interview, but it was from the standpoint that he was kind of trying to sell me on it in a way, and he really didn't have to. I was liking what I was hearing, uh, but it was very funny. And then I met a bunch of people, and we went out to lunch, and I had some stuff to think about when I got home. But after getting home, I talked to Jill about it, and we decided it was time to move to Wisconsin, and ended up going out there and got to work on the Birthright game first. It had already been designed by Colin McComb and Rich Baker and other members of the team, but I got to do a bunch of the early products on it, and it was such a transition too, going from West End where we were doing like multiple products a month with a staff of something like 11,
Mm,
and then moving to TSR where you got a month to work on 32 pages worth of a product. It was like, wow, what am I going to do with the other like 3 weeks out of the month?
yeah,
Turned
that was
out what I did, I kept doing freelance. So, but yeah, it was quite a shock. Um, uh, then it was a shock when TSR laid off a whole bunch of people, including myself, for about 2 hours, and then Wizards bought us several months later. Several months of sitting around not knowing whether today was going to be the last day the company was open. That was quite a trip,
right.
as you probably remember.
So
But
the the Christmas layoffs, the 96 Christmas layoffs. Um,
yeah,
your story is unique.
yeah, I guess it
You've just
is.
you just hinted about it. How about tell tell us about that?
Sure. Okay. So we had all known something was going on. Jim Ward had left the company. I think it was in October of that year, and just rumors were around that things were not going well. Now, upper management at TSR did not really uh, tell people what was going on a lot. We had not a lot of ideas, and there were things that were going on that we knew were kind of weird. We also knew that we were spending way too much money on a lot of stuff. Like the Birthright box set came out with all these crazy bells and whistles, uh, which made it basically almost impossible to make a profit on. The more you printed, the more money you lost because it was so expensive to
Yeah,
produce. Beautiful set, great campaign setting, but just ridiculously expensive. But anyway, people can go read various books and hear about what was going on there. But on a personal level, we were all kind of holding our breath, especially between Thanksgiving and Christmas. it was just kind of that time of year where you're just really sort of worried about stuff. Now, back then, it was not as common to have the fun annual Christmas layoffs. That was not a thing. But we all, I don't know, just kind of figured that if we could make it to Christmas, then the new year would probably bring, sort of new life, new hope, and things would be better. We'd be okay. And we're counting down the days. And TSR at that time, much like Wizards and everything later on, you got the week between Christmas and New Year's off. And we had our Christmas party. And I don't remember the exact date of the Christmas party, but it was only a few days before the break. And everybody kind of saw that as sort of a milestone. Well, if we're having this Christmas party, then, things must be okay. And then I think it was the very next day, we started hearing people getting called down to the office. At first, we thought it was just a couple of individuals, because some of the people we'd heard about were people who were kind of not maybe doing so well. But then they called in some of the key staff to the survivors of the Passover meeting, as it was often referred to tell them what was going on, and everybody else just kind of looking around to see what's going on. And I was concerned. I mean, I mentally I was like, hey, I'm the lead designer in the Worlds group. I do a lot of work. I not only do I do all the stuff I'm assigned, but I take on extra freelance and I do a lot of coordinating things, and so I'm probably okay, but you never know. So I started packing up some of my personal stuff, and at this time, Rich Baker, who was a friend of mine, had been in the Passover meeting, comes into my office and goes, "Oh, you heard?" And I said, "Heard what?" His face just went white. And right behind him was Carol Hubbard, the person from HR, and she was there to escort me down to the office and tell me that I'd been laid off. I went down there and I was kind of in shock. It had been the first time I'd been laid off. To put it in context, I basically started working when I was about 14 and never stopped. I never really thought about what that would be like. And I drove home. It was about a 20-minute drive, and I was thinking about what I'm going to do and how I'm going to break it to my wife, Jill, and what I was going to do next, how we were going to survive. Because there was not much in the way of severance. I think it was going to be like 2 weeks worth of severance plus whatever you had vacation time left, which wasn't much. And so but by the time I get home, I'm starting to think about who I'd call, because I had been at West End. I had been very big into networking. I knew people at White Wolf. I knew people at FASA. Heck, I'd been offered a job at FASA. I was like, there are people I can talk to about doing freelance, things like that. So I had talked myself into the idea that things are going to be okay, but it's going to be hard. And I call Jill, and she's in childcare, so she can't break away really easily. But she breaks away long enough for me to tell her what happened, and she's just devastated. She's like, we're out here in the middle of Wisconsin. We'd grown up with our families around in Pennsylvania. We're now cut off from everything, and she's very upset. But she can't talk. She's like, I'll
Understandably
call you
so.
back. Yeah, I'll call you back. And I hang up the phone, and I'm waiting for her to call back because I want to start calling unemployment agency. I want to start calling contacts and everything. And, as silly as that is, like a couple of days before Christmas, nothing was going to happen. Plus, we found out later that it would have taken a while to do unemployment stuff anyway. But I'm sitting here on the edge of my seat going, come on, Joe, call me back so that I can tell you we can talk and I can start making these calls. And the phone rings. I assume it's Jill. It's not. It's Harold Johnson. Harold was creative director at TSR, and he had been my boss. And he was a really good guy, and did a lot of good stuff with the Worlds Group and everything. And he'd been very instrumental in Dragonlance, as you know, and a bunch of other stuff, Gen Con. He calls me back and he says, he's like, I'm sorry I didn't see you before you left. Really sorry about what happened, but I went and talked to Lorraine, and I want you to come back. Are you willing to come back? And I had to think about that for about 10 seconds. I'm like, it's middle of winter in Wisconsin and I don't have a job. Yeah, I'll come back. But I'm like, I got
Right.
to wait until my wife calls so I can tell her the news, because I've already told her I've been laid off. I got to tell her I've been rehired. He's like, well, if you're up for it, come back today so I can let people know and everything. And so Jill calls. I tell her what's going on. She's basically had a, not exactly. I mean, Jill was very level headed. She didn't have a meltdown or anything, but she was very, scared and upset.
Right.
And but I calmed her down and told her we'll talk more when I get home. But I got to get back to work. So I drive back, and the people who are still there, including you and Bill, had not been laid off. In fact, I remember one of the last things I did before I left was ask somebody to give you a ride home because I had given you a ride into work that day.
Right.
I don't know if you remember that, but I
I
went and
was
found
yes,
somebody to
no,
give you a ride.
I do. That
Yeah,
you were the only person I got to talk to that got laid off, and then
yeah. Well,
so
they
my
escorted everybody else out of the building. I told them I wasn't leaving until I found out whether you had a ride home or not.
my side of that story was about um, I don't know, however long it was. This is about 10 minutes before Harold called you. We were all
Hmm.
gathering upstairs. It looked like everything was over. Everyone was starting to look around very nervously and to count who was there, and everyone was hugs going all around, and we figured it must be over. And just then, Harold comes walking up the stairs and stands at the end. Doesn't approach us. Stands at the end of the hallway and points at me and just kind of waves his finger over. I'm like, oh crap, Ed's gone already. What am I going to do when what would they for? How could they do that? And I saw him walking over, and everyone's got hangdog
Yeah,
looks. And I come over and I come up to Harold, and Harold says, "Hey, do you know Ed's home phone number?" And I think because I'm going to have to call for a ride to come home. I say, yeah. He says, good, because I just got him rehired. Like, for God's sake, Harold, you scared the crap out of me.
yep. It's one of the reasons that whenever I get called down into a superior's office nowadays, they
Yeah,
know to say everything's all right. Can you come down and talk? Um, my current boss at ZOS will do that even. Uh, but yeah, I came back. You guys had all had your survivor meeting, so I missed out on that. And I had to explain to people who hadn't heard that, yeah, I was not trespassing. I was back. And then I remember Sue Wineline, at that time Sue Cook, comes over to me and expresses that she's glad I'm back and everything. But she asked my advice. She asks, we were going to have this big holiday party tonight. What should I do? Should I cancel this? And I said, no way. You got to have this, so that people can see each other and talk to each other, and the people who've been let go. Hopefully, we can find out how they're doing, what their plans are, if there's anything we can do to help, all that. And so she and Monty had the party, and it was great. I mean, it was kind of combination party and wake in a lot of ways, but a lot of people came, a lot more than I think
yeah,
anybody
yeah.
really expected. Um, Steve Miller set himself on fire, which is kind of a holiday tradition for Steve. Um, he backed into a candle, for those of you who aren't aware, and he'd done that before, apparently.
And he did it
Um,
again afterwards.
and a lot of people got drunk, but nobody got violently so, and everybody got home all right. But it was a good opportunity for us all to see each other. The big thing that I had not thought about is because of even the proto internet that existed then. We had AOL and CompuServe and stuff like that. There were lists circulating about who'd been left on, let go, and I was on those lists, and so I had to explain to people, especially those people who had been laid off and did not get hired back, that I was back at work,
Yeah,
and I was
as
feeling a very special kind of survival guilt at that point. Nobody gave me a hard time about it or anything, but I always felt like, gee, why was I hired back and these people weren't? Because we always had rumors and thoughts about what had dictated uh, who got let go and who didn't. And one of the ones that I always stick to, and I don't know if it's true or not, was that I was done with my project.
Yeah, well, it
You
turns
know,
out I've had it confirmed from a lot of places that that was one of the main decision makers was
yeah,
people who had just finished projects got laid off and people who were in the middle of projects didn't. And that Harold
yeah,
went in, and having talked to Harold about this, he went in and his um, pitch to Lorraine was, "Look, he may have just finished that project, but he's got these others, and I can't do them without him." And Lorraine said, "Oh, well, all right, well then bring him back."
the one thing I will say about Lorraine, I never had much interactions with her, and of course, I've everybody's always heard the stories and everything, and I know that there were things that she did that certainly didn't help the company, but previous management had put them in that situation anyway. But whatever. One thing I do remember though is when I came back, she was there at the door with Harold and apologized to me for what had happened and welcomed me back. So I thought that took a certain amount of something, certain amount of integrity to basically be there and say sorry. She didn't have to, you
Right?
know.
No, she certainly could have just stayed back in her office.
Yep. But yeah, that was an interesting day. And then, of course, as you know, we published one more issue of I think Dragon and Dungeon magazine, and then that was the last stuff we published for about 7 months
At least.
until the Wizards sale went through. So we were always, I mean, as you know, we were just sitting around there. We were trying to get stuff done. The alternity team that was working on the new game was fairly productive. Everybody else was, at best semi-productive. I think I completed one book in the time it usually took me to complete two. Uh, Tribes of the Heartless Waste, the Vosgard guide for Birthright, and a lot of people I don't think completed much of anything in that time because it was just you know felt like a tomb.
Was
But
weird time.
yeah, but then we moved out to Wizards. Things were interesting in other ways.
And then everyone was great, and then things got interesting again.
Hmm.
So of all those things, so you're saying you worked on a lot of different things at TSR, Birthright being one of the top ones. What, looking back on it now, uh, what would you say are the products that um, do you think are going to be most remembered, or should be most remembered? Whether or not they will be, I suppose, is a different story.
Well, I have sort of bittersweet memories about just about everything I've ever worked on for a variety of reasons. I would say that it's probably very easy to pull out uh, third edition as the big thing, the big deal. Uh, I got made the creative director to basically help the team, the design team, the editorial team, everything get it done. But in a lot of ways, I think I'm a little bit more proud of or would like to be remembered more for the work on 3.5. Third edition was a big leap. We changed a lot. We changed a lot more from second edition to third edition than I think was changed from first edition AD&D to second edition.
Hmm.
Uh, and with any big leap come, stumbles. And 3.5 had to be compatible with third edition because we didn't want to do a whole new edition, but it had to fix some of those stumbles. It had to, you know, polish some of the things. It had to make some of the stuff, make a little more sense, rebalancing. And I think that the team that worked on that had, in a way, almost what I would think of as your classic no-win scenario. If they did a poor job, then it would really badly reflect on them. If they did a good job, it was because they worked on a game that was already really popular and really good. But I think that they did it, and I'd like to think I was a big part of helping that happen because uh, the game that came out that was 3.5, not only did it, you know, take third edition and that was already really great and sort of polish it and refine it and make a lot of the stuff better or cleaner or easier to understand or easier to more accessible. Um, but as we know, it also you know ended up even though D20 and everything was already out there, Pathfinder, for example, I think is much more based on 3.5 than on third edition in a lot of ways. A lot of other stuff derived from the 3.5 rules and 3.5 changes. That was a big thing. But I, I'm talking about product here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I would like to be more remembered for, and this also has some bittersweet memories about it, but was what I felt my support of the various teams that I worked with on D&D. Um, I had been, as you know, a lead designer at West End. I had been the lead on multiple game products, multiple games, novels, things like that. And while I enjoyed doing that, I found I enjoyed working in the support and in a leadership role, but also I always thought of leadership more as support of those teams. I wanted I wanted those teams to succeed. I wanted those designers, those editors, those artists, those people to be able to stand up and say, "Look at this great thing I worked on. Look at my name on the cover. Look at my name in the credits. I did something really good." And I always felt that was more my contribution, the thing I'd be most proud of. I wanted to enable others to focus and get their job done, and if that meant going to meetings or fighting with management or fighting with members or getting everybody going in the same direction, then I felt I was doing my job. And I'm not saying I'm just the best at this sort of thing. I wasn't, but there were times I can think back where I made a difference, and I thought it was more. I more made a difference, to D&D as a whole by helping those teams succeed. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does. I think that's one of the things. You and I had similar career paths in that we came out of doing editorial and writing and went into the management side, into the creative direction and team leading. And I think that you and I also have similar attitudes towards the fact that that role is about enabling the team to to achieve their best results, right? To
Yeah.
be using your insights. Certainly, you want it. Your experience is part of helping to suggest things that they might not come up with. But in the end, you're not doing the thing; they're doing the thing, and your job is to, I don't know, wrangle cats is maybe an overused uh, uh, idiom, but is to get these creative people working together on a timeline, and you're the connection to the rest of the company, and to make sure the
And it's
project succeeds.
it's to enable them to succeed. It's to give them the tools they need, whether that tool be another person, an actual tool, an idea, a opinion on their idea. I mean, you want them to come up with this stuff. It's a lot of what I do now as a zone lead on Elder Scrolls Online. I mean, I do roll up my sleeves and pitch in and design things and fix bugs and do that, but a lot of my time is spent trying to make sure that the team knows which way to go to succeed.
Great.
And I don't want to dictate to them, oh, here's the plot of this adventure I want you to write. Here's the character I want you to use. I make suggestions along those lines. I certainly help facilitate that, and I, sometimes more than I want, will produce design documents that they need to to work with because that's what we can get approved and that's what will make everything all together. But for example, just recently we're working on the new chapter Gold Road, and we just recently took about I don't know a third of the team to do an in-house playtest. And one of the things I thought that was so great was that these people had been so focused on their own work that they mostly knew what they'd been working on and they hadn't really seen the rest of the chapter. And now they got to, and it was interesting because they found a lot of stuff, a lot of things that we need to fix, a lot of things we need to work on to address, to improve before we're ready to release. But they're also, even though they've been very much told, hey, this is your opportunity to try and make things better, they couldn't help but talk about the good work that the rest of the team had done. There were compliments all throughout their feedback.
Right.
And that's great to see because they weren't specifically asked to do that. They just couldn't help themselves. And I thought that was really great because it certainly improves the rest of the team's morale, but it also shows that they're seeing the big picture. They've had to focus for several months on their own little picture, like this objective, that delve, this story, and now they're seeing how it all fits together. And they came out of the playtest, I think, really enjoying that. And that really made me feel good because ultimately it's my responsibility to hope to convey to the team, hey, here's what the big picture is, while they can focus on their more detail oriented stuff. And,
Right.
so that was, and it was really nice that it just happened, so I could talk about it. That's the sort of stuff I'm more proud of. Certainly written stuff that I like and everything like that, but it's all the team stuff that I really enjoy.
Well, that's awesome. It's one of the reasons why you are as good at your job as you are. I think that in my time, the people who have not had that attitude are the ones um, that are less. I don't want to say popular, but I think that the teams show it when their leader uh, is not focused on the success of a team rather than the success for their name.
Yeah, yeah. As a zone lead, I often get an opportunity to stand out in front of a camera or get an interview or something. But one of the things that I've always tried to do is make sure to acknowledge what the team has done, and if at all opportunities, drag them into the front of the
Right.
camera, assuming that's where they want to be. There are, of course, people who don't like doing that. But
All
I
right.
remember.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
oh,
Go
well,
ahead. No, no,
no,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say I remember a time I was doing this. My very first zone lead project was Murkmire, an expansion for Elder Scrolls, and every time we were doing a run through, I would call out, somebody's name. It's like, oh, this is something that this person did or that person, or oh, I remember this person did this quest or suggested that or whatever. And afterwards, one of the artists sent me a note. He goes, "You never said my name." I'm so sorry. You're right. And he had done I mean, this was not somebody who he had done a bunch of really good stuff. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'll make sure to make it up to you. And I made sure in the next thing I mentioned him a couple of times, but it was really funny. A few people did comment how much they liked being called out, and a lot of our audience did too. But it was funny. The very first person I heard from was a person I forgot to mention, and deservedly so. You know.
All right. So we're about tech problems notwithstanding. We're getting up close to an hour. Let's shift the conversation a little to uh, D&D more broadly. I mean, the whole impetus for starting this show for me was a 50th anniversary, and between us, we've been playing for a lot of those 50 years. Maybe not as many as some, uh, but a lot, and we worked a number of years on it. What as we come into this 50th anniversary, what comes to mind? What do you think about just is this a mark that should be made note of? Other than the fact that it's 50 years, what what is there about D&D that makes it worth celebrating uh, after half a
Nothing.
century?
It's just it's just a game. No, no. I mean, it's not hyperbole to say that D&D has spawned not just one but multiple industries in a lot of ways. I mean, would hobby gaming in the U.S. exist without D&D? Probably. We do see the occasional success of Euro games and things like that, but really, you look back on it, up until the mid '90s, games any more complicated than like Monopoly barely cracked the surface of most people's awareness. But D&D, I mean, not only spawned a huge chunk of the tabletop role playing industry, not sure that other role playing games would exist without it. I can't prove that they wouldn't, but, you know, it was the first and it was the biggest. But also a lot of the computer games and stuff. I mean, think about the old campus muds and stuff that were created. They were basically transliterations of D&D into very basic computer format,
Mm,
stuff that became games like Zork or Wizardry or Ultima. The first MMOs, they were all based on, you know, what D&D had already done. Is it possible something else would have cracked that? Maybe, but it didn't. So D&D, my if it weren't for D&D, most likely career path I would have had would have been, I've been a teacher. Not a bad thing to do at all, very worthwhile, but my life would have been very different. Um, a lot of people's lives would have been different. A lot of our recreation, our reading, our way of life. I mean, I look around this room that I'm in right now. I see board games, miniatures. I see a big uh, dragon-headed popcorn thing from the D&D movie. I see uh, a bunch of collectibles and everything, all that could be said to have sprouted from D&D. Now I see some stuff that didn't. I see like a Star Wars robot. I see a Lord of the Rings sculpture. Things that would have existed without D&D. But I think so many of us owe a lot to that, but D&D owes us a lot too.
right,
You never forget that the fandom, uh, the people who work on it, they are the contributors. They are the ones who make it happen. Whether D&D is owned by a person or a corporation or whatever, without those creators, without those fans, it's nothing. It doesn't exist without us. Um, are there a lot more of us? Can we be replaced? Sure, but could it be replaced? Yeah, I mean, theoretically, it could. It's an important thing to celebrate, but nothing lasts forever,
right,
uh, and it's better to celebrate it and recognize what we've gotten out of it and what it's gotten from us than to just sit back and not acknowledge the cultural or personal importance. You know, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's the way I think about it.
yeah. Um, so we've just been talking about some of the things that we remember from the previous uh, 50 years. With all of the technology and the other ways that this could shift going forward, and all the movies and other things that are going on, what do you think the the next few years, or in the next 10 years of D&D, are going to be like? Or gaming. I mean, like you say, D&D is a good surrogate for the whole of this. this role playing hobby, which has now become a thing unto itself, which 50 years ago didn't exist. Right.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the challenges that D&D, tabletop role playing, computer role playing, all that face are, um, well, to be honest, a lot of it surrounds monetization. How do you make money off of this? And that sounds kind of cold and sounds kind of bad. But think about it the other way. In order for people to produce these products that we love, they either have to do it for nothing or there has to be some sort of compensation.
yeah.
How do we make it so that the compensation, that the monetization feels fair, feels adequate, feels, non-predatory or whatever? We do things like microtransactions, we do subscription models, we do book sales, computer game sales, all these other things, um, sponsorships, Kickstarters, anything like that. And there's certain things that people hate, and certain things that people are fine with, and certain things that people don't even think about. One of the jokes we used to have is that people who complained about spending, 20 bucks on a player's handbook, or 30 bucks or whatever, we're always like, are you kind of insane? Because if I buy the 3 core books, I can play forever. I mean, I don't technically need to spend another nickel. I mean,
Right.
well, okay, I get some dice, but I can always drag out my counters and chips, little cups. But seriously, your value for money is pretty big there. But on the other end, how do I stay in business if I'm a publisher, if I can't get people to buy my product and make it so I can keep publishing more products? I mean, TSR and to some extent Wizards have gone through periods of, let's publish lots of stuff, because if we publish lots of stuff, people will buy lots of stuff and we'll get money. On the other hand, they've also gone through, well, let's publish very few things, but figure out other ways to monetize,
Right.
licensing, microtransactions, things like that. And it's all a matter of what is palatable, what isn't. I can draw parallels to other industries. I'm not going to go on forever, but I think that that's going to be the next few years, is trying to figure out what's palatable. And the big concern there is, if you do something bad enough, you can kill the golden goose. I don't think we're necessarily in danger of that, but I see it in tabletop industry, computer industry, everything like that. You see things that could be an initial huge success. This is a hit. Do these sorts of things, and then backlash, and then suddenly that thing that 6 months ago was making a ton of money now makes zero money because people have turned against it. Uh, you got to be careful, and there's, and it's not that you necessarily. It's kind of like back in the day. There were years that TSR wasn't competing with anybody. There were
Right.
years it wasn't competing with anybody. What they were competing was themselves, because you've always got to make sure you're providing value. And in a lot of cases in those times, like late days of TSR, they were beating themselves, by not reacting and changing and making things happen. I'm not a business expert. People can tell you more about this sort of thing than I can, but it's always a constant struggle, because today's audience is not tomorrow's audience.
Yeah.
Uh, you gotta constantly be reacting and evolving. You don't necessarily want to lose the old audience, but you're going to, no matter what. It's going to happen, you know. But you shouldn't dismiss them. But you also got to look towards the next day's audience. Uh, what do they want to do? For a while, subscriptions to MMOs were the big thing. Now, very few MMOs have mandatory subscriptions. It's
Right.
you know, Um, anyway, sorry. I that's kind of where it's sort of a dry topic, but it's where
Well,
I
it's
think a
a
lot of,
it's a tough question to answer, right? It's you say there are so many ways, so many lenses you can look at it through, and that's one that doesn't get brought up a lot. Buzz is important. If it's going to survive as an industry, then everything you talk about has those are the questions that have to get answered. And the, one of the, as you say, it's as true as ever that once you buy the rules, you don't technically need to buy anything, and and there's enough um, there's enough stuff in the used bookstores out there to supply generations of people to keep gaming without anyone making any new publisher making $1 off it if they want to.
yeah, and well, and the thing is, if you do stuff that turns people off enough, you'll either create will the stores haunt the internet, do that rather than buy whatever you're selling them.
Yeah,
But if you can make stuff appealing, I mean, if you can lower the barrier to entry, I mean, um, I got back into miniatures painting recently for a
mm,
variety of reasons, but that helped me was there's a company called Army Painter that came out with these things called speed paints, or which are contrast paints. And I know other companies have contrast paints and have come out with them first and everything. But one of the things that they do for me is they make painting miniatures easier. Instead of having to do all kinds of different
right.
layers and shading and all this other stuff. Technically, I can paint a miniature and use a paint on a section once. Now, that I don't actually do that. I do some more detailed work, but I can produce a much better looking miniature in a faster amount of time than I could in the past. And I'm talking way past. Uh, and that made it more accessible. It made me want to buy stuff. It made me want to buy more miniatures, made me want to buy more paints, more accessories, things like that. So I have like a whole couple of shelves worth of stuff around here that you can't see because my camera's not
Right.
pointing there. Um, because they made it easy. They made it fun. Also, all the individual things I've been buying are pretty cheap. You're seeing a cattail every once in a while. He wants to get fed.
Everyone wants a cat
And
on the internet.
he's being very polite right now. Usually he'd be yelling at this time, but he gets he hears a word he's talking. But anyway, yeah. So all the individual paints are inexpensive. The individual miniatures are mostly inexpensive.
Yeah,
The individual other stuff are inexpensive. Have I spent a lot of money on those things over the last couple of months? Probably, but in little bits and pieces.
right.
And so that worked. And the fact that they made the thing more appealing. I think that if we can make if we can make a game a balance between accessible and perceived value and profitable, so that because companies have got to be able to pay their employees, they got to be able to pay their vendors, but also the audience has to see that they're getting a high perceived value because
Right.
there are a lot of things you can spend your money on. We I can go off on rants about other unrelated stuff, but you can we used to often weigh the cost of buying something like a book or a game versus how many movies could I go see, because a movie was considered 2 hours worth of
Right.
entertainment.
Right.
And if I could get 2 hours out of entertainment for X amount of dollars, well, if I buy a game, how much time will I spend playing it? Value. It was just a funny little formula. And, again, that's where I come back to the whole idea of having a role playing game. I talked about D&D, but, any role playing game that you like, you're going to spend way more than 2 hours playing.
Right.
You
Right.
know, now granted, it's going to cost more than a movie ticket, though nowadays not that much. Um, uh,
No,
so,
I
so
think
the
it
next,
actually I think it probably works out about the same, right? That a book is about 5 movies, and I think that was true back then. I think it's probably a core rule book is to get everything you need somewhere around that. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's even 3,
I mean,
maybe
that's,
it's
that's
8.
certainly
But it's
that's certainly in the ballpark. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, if it's 5 movies, then am
So
I
you're
going
going
to
to
play
get
this
more
game?
than 10
Or
hours of use out of it. If you do,
yeah,
then it's a bargain,
it's a bargain. And considering you're probably not going to play it by yourself,
right?
you know, and of course reading does count as enjoyment. But yeah, if you and 4 friends get together and play it for 2 hours, you've just made your movie money, or
Yeah,
something like that. So yeah, and if you can convince your friends to buy it for you, then
even better.
with this argument, yeah.
All right, Ted, I've had a great time. As I said before we got started, the hour we could keep going for another hour, but I'm going to make us not.
I think my cats would rebel.
Right.
You'd
Well,
see me taken
we
down.
want to be
But
kind
well,
to
I'm
pets too.
sorry, I'm sorry I got a little dry toward the end there. But
That's all right. You know what? I've been saying to everyone that's been on, this is going to be a long year. I'm going to invite a lot of people on, and if you're interested, we'll probably have you back on later in the year. Maybe when we get to the era of 3.5 stuff, so somewhere
that'd be
where we're
great. Love to talk
we're
about it. I've
looking
got
in.
plenty of yeah. One thing, let me plug. Like I said, I work
Sure
for
thing.
ZeniMax Online Studios right now. We're working on latest expansion to Elder Scrolls Online, which is Gold Road. But it's also Elder Scrolls Online's 10th anniversary. You know how rare it is for a uh, massively multiplayer online game to not only survive but thrive for 10 years?
Yeah.
That's something. People should check it out. We're going to do a lot of cool stuff this year and next year because technically this year is 10 years for PC,
Right.
next year is 10 for consoles. So we're basically doing 2 celebrations. And I just heard the cat starting to meow, so I better get the
All
heck
right.
out of
Yeah.
here.
No. Ted gave me a link. I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's too long to throw up here and have everyone write it down. Ted, thank you very much for coming in. Give my best to the cats. Tell them I'm sorry they had to wait so long. And I will talk to you soon offline, and we'll talk about having you back on again for another show. So I
All
will
right.
now
Thank you,
segue out of
Stan.
here. Bye, Ted.
Thanks, Stan. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Bye bye.
All right. So sorry for everyone about the technical difficulties we had. Uh, I'm going to go back and edit all together. If you're watching this on replay, you probably don't know that there was much of a problem because I will have somehow knitted it all together into a fun format. Um, Before we go, I'm going to once again encourage people to please check out the free newsletter at 50yearsinthe.dungeon.substack.com. Let's say I will have the finished version of the drawing I've been doing tonight. Let me see if I can pull that up here for you all to see one more time. So I was working on my iteration of the Swords and Spells, or Spells and I don't remember the title of the book. But that's as far as I got in the hour, which is pretty good. I'm going to finish that, do it in color, and I'll show you that in the next episode. Um, just so you know, every month, at the end of the month, I'm going to pick the name of one person who is a subscriber, including the free subscribers, and send them a signed art print of one of the drawings that I did during the show. If you are a paid subscriber uh, at at the yearly level, then you get one a month for, well, not for free. That you get that as part of what you're paying for. But I'm not. While I would like to have people come in and pay, as Ted was talking about, it's interesting. Is he was mentioning the difficulty of finding a way to monetize what you're doing, and that certainly I'm not. I didn't start this podcast with the idea of monetization at the forefront of my mind. But the more I work on it, the more people say, "Hey, you should do another drawing like this, or you should make some stickers. You should do some other thing that, yeah." All of that requires monetization. So in the end, I certainly do want people to come in and become paid subscribers. Uh, but don't let that stop you from coming in and joining us for free. I will send all of the drawings to you in your email and some other fun stuff too, if through the free Substack. So check it out. If you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. It's that easy. Yes. So next week we will have Bill Slavacek, who Ed mentioned in his talk, is going to be our guest as we look at 1977. And I hope that you all will come back and join me. Hopefully, I will figure out what caused the tech problems from earlier, and they won't repeat themselves, but I make no promises. You see, I'm a chatter and a cartoonist, not a tech guy. So we're working on it. We'll get it figured out. Figured it out. We'll get it figured out in the end. So thank you, everyone, for joining me. I had a good time. Thank you, Ed Stark, for coming along this time. I do hope we can get him back and chat some more. But until next week, I hope that all your roles are critical successes. God, that's cheesy. I'm never going to say that again. Bye, everyone. Have a good week.